You're not stuck because you're lazy. You're stuck because you're thinking too much. And it doesn't feel like a problem, because from your side it looks like responsibility. You reread the message. You wait for the right timing. You think through the next step just a little longer. But here's the shift you're not noticing. What used to take seconds now takes minutes. And what used to happen in real life now mostly happens in your head. Nothing breaks. You just stop closing things. Messages stay unsent. Ideas stay in draft. Opportunities get processed, but not executed. And over time, that creates something expensive. A backlog of decisions that were never fully made. And here's the part most people miss. This isn't about overthinking as a habit. It's a feedback loop. Thinking feels productive because it removes risk. No rejection, no friction, no irreversible move. So your brain starts preferring it. Not because it works, but because it's safe. But the real problem isn't where you think it is. Because while you're optimizing internally, timing is expiring externally. And 5 years from now, this doesn't look like failure. It looks like a life that never expanded. So in this video, I'll break down 3 signs you're stuck in this loop, and 1 adjustment that forces action back into your system. It usually starts in small, ordinary moments. You're about to send a message, but you reread it a few times first. Adjust a word. Change the tone slightly. Maybe wait a bit before hitting send. Or you're deciding on something simple. What to choose, what to say, what step to take next. And you give yourself a moment to think it through. Nothing unusual. It feels like you're just being careful, like you're avoiding unnecessary mistakes. And in isolation, each of these moments makes sense. They feel harmless, even productive. Because you're not ignoring the decision. You're engaging with it. You're thinking. But then something subtle begins to happen. The pause before acting gets just a little longer. What used to take seconds now takes minutes. What used to take minutes starts stretching into something harder to define. Not overwhelming, not dramatic, just slightly delayed. And it's easy to justify. Because from the outside, and even to yourself, it still looks like responsibility. It still feels like you're doing the right thing. But there's a small detail that doesn't quite fit. The decision hasn't been made yet. And for the first time, it's not because you don't know what to do. It's because you're still thinking about it. At first, it doesn't register as a pattern. It just feels like you're taking your time. You open something, read it, think about it, and leave it for later. Not because you're avoiding it, just because you want to come back with a clearer mind. And you do come back. But when you do, something interesting happens. You don't pick up where you left off. You start the thinking process again, re-evaluating, reconsidering, running through the same angles as if the extra time somehow changed the answer. And again, nothing about this feels wrong, because each individual moment still makes sense. Each delay has a reason. Each pause feels justified. But when you zoom out slightly, a quiet pattern begins to form. Small decisions don't close. They linger. Messages stay unsent a little longer. Ideas stay in draft form. Simple next steps remain. Pending. Not abandoned. Just not executed. And the strange part is, you're still mentally engaged with all of them. They occupy space. You revisit them in your head while doing other things. You refine them internally. You adjust possibilities that haven't even happened yet. It creates a subtle feeling that you're still moving forward, but externally, almost nothing has changed. And over time, this creates a quiet backlog, not of tasks, but of decisions that were never fully completed. At some point, the pattern begins to show consequences. Not obvious ones, nothing dramatic, just small moments where something could have happened, but didn't. You think about reaching out to someone. You consider sharing an idea. You notice an opportunity that feels almost within reach. And instead of ignoring it, you engage with it. You think it through. What would you say? How would it come across? Is this the right timing? Is there a better way to do it? The intention is still there. Nothing about it feels like avoidance. But while you're thinking, something else is happening quietly in the background. Time is moving. The moment you were responding to, the specific context, the timing, the relevance, begins to shift. And eventually it disappears. Not in a noticeable way. Just enough that when you return to it, it no longer feels the same. So you hesitate again. Maybe later. Maybe when it feels more aligned. And this repeats. Not once or twice, but across different areas of your life. And slowly, a subtle trade begins to form. You're still engaging with opportunities, but mostly in your head. And the real-world version, the one where something actually happens, starts showing up less and less. Not because you're incapable, but because thinking has quietly taken the place where action used to begin. By now, something feels different. But it's hard to explain. Because from your perspective, you haven't stopped. You're still thinking about things constantly, still refining ideas, still analyzing decisions from multiple angles. In fact, it might even feel like you're doing more than before. You're more aware, more precise, more intentional. And that creates a convincing sense of progress. Like you're getting closer to doing things the right way. But there's a small inconsistency that's easy to overlook. The external results don't reflect that effort. Things you've been working on for weeks still exist mostly in thought form. Plans feel clearer, but not closer. Decisions feel more detailed, but not finalized. And instead of questioning the process, the mind adjusts the explanation. Maybe it just needs more clarity. Maybe you haven't thought it through enough yet. Maybe one more angle will make the difference. So, the thinking continues. But now it has a different role. It's no longer just preparation. It becomes a way to feel like you're moving, without actually moving. And because that feeling is convincing, it's easy to stay there. Days pass in a state that feels active, but leaves no visible trace. And over time, a quiet gap begins to grow between how much you feel you're doing and what is actually happening. At this point, nothing feels broken. There's no clear failure, no obvious mistake. Just a growing sense that things aren't quite moving. You still have ideas, still have intentions, still see possibilities. But fewer of them turn into something real. And the cost of that doesn't show up immediately. It builds quietly. An opportunity you considered weeks ago is no longer available. A conversation you meant to start now feels irrelevant. A path you once saw clearly no longer looks the same. Not because you chose against it, but because you never fully chose at all. And time made the decision for you. What's left is subtle, a collection of almosts. things you nearly did, directions you almost explored, moments that felt close, but never materialized. And none of them feel significant on their own, but together they start shaping something larger, a trajectory that looks stable from the outside, but hasn't meaningfully changed in a long time. And that's where the cost becomes visible, not as a single missed chance, but as a pattern where movement is replaced by consideration, where life doesn't collapse, it just slowly stops expanding. By now, it might seem like the problem is just overthinking. But that word makes it sound accidental, almost harmless. What's actually happening is more structured than that. Because every time you choose to think instead of act, something very specific is happening in the background. You're staying in a controlled environment. Inside your head, nothing is at risk. You can simulate outcomes without consequences, adjust scenarios without commitment, explore possibilities without being exposed to failure. And your brain registers that as a smart move. It feels like preparation, like optimization, but functionally it's something else. It's a substitution. Real-world action involves uncertainty, friction, and irreversible outcomes. Thinking removes all of that, so the brain starts to prefer it. Not because it leads to better results, but because it avoids discomfort while still feeling productive. And over time, this creates a loop. You think to prepare, but the thinking itself reduces the need to act, which creates more situations that require thinking. And the cycle reinforces itself. The more you rely on it, the more natural it feels, until eventually action begins to feel premature, and thinking feels like the responsible default, even when it isn't moving anything forward. At no point did you decide to stop taking action. There wasn't a moment where you chose hesitation over movement. In fact, everything you did felt like the opposite. You were trying to be careful, trying to avoid mistakes, trying to make better decisions. And on the surface, that's exactly what it looked like. But underneath, a different exchange was happening. Without noticing, you started trading action for analysis. Not all at once, just in small increments. A delayed message here, a postponed decision there, an idea that stayed internal a little longer than it should have. Each one felt insignificant, but together they created a pattern, one where nothing goes wrong, but nothing really moves either. And that's the part that's easy to miss, because there's no clear failure to point to, no obvious mistake to correct. Just a version of your life that feels stable, but hasn't expanded in the way you once expected. And it all traces back to something that still feels correct, thinking more. But now, seen from the outside, the trade becomes visible. In trying to avoid the cost of being wrong, you quietly accepted the cost of never fully finding out. And that cost doesn't announce itself. It just shows up over time, as a life that stayed mostly inside your head.